So let's play a game where we take as many Intercessors as we can, and have a think about how we can tool them up to best face down the threats that the galaxy has to offer. Hello and welcome to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today's video will be a bit more of a fun idea, where I've given each chapter the challenge of taking 90 Intercessors and little else in the army list, and seeing what characters and support units that we can take to make the most out of them on the battlefield. I have put some self-imposed limits in place here, where anything else that we buy for them has to be mainly to support the Intercessors rather than out-and-out damage dealers in their own right. So it's the actual Space Marines that will be doing and taking the damage, rather than them just being along to accompany some very fighty characters, which I'm sure would be decently strong. I've gone with 90 Intercessors because they will fit into 1 patrol and 1 battalion, without necessarily having to buy in 4 HQ choices to take 2 battalions, but I have done this for some of the armies. Obviously these aren't supposed to be exactly hyper-competitive lists, but I honestly do think that they could easily win games in the right scenarios, just by giving your opponent nothing to shoot at but 2 wound toughness 4 models, with a decent amount of anti-infantry firepower, and of course a ton of bodies with reasonable melee to flood the midfield objectives. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I've spent quite some time going through each chapter in turn. 90 Intercessors just by themselves come to 1530 points, and in most variants of the list I've added power fists to the sergeants to give every squad a reasonable threat in melee. It's not much, but at least that will give them some anti-tank punch if the opponent plays too carelessly with their vehicles. For all of the standard rulebook Space Marine chapters, I've chosen to use the Indomitus Crusaders formation, which means that a big battalion of Intercessors should all be able to access 2 chapter traits for a turn, particularly being able to get something like Imperial Fist's extra bolter shots and ignore cover for a turn, or perhaps the Raven Guard -1 to hit while in cover could be extremely helpful as well. You can do this with the Grey Shield Warlord trait, which you can buy in for an additional command point. So let's take a look at them one by one. Firstly, for Ultramarines I've gone for bolt rifles with 1 squad of Stalker bolt rifles, just in case we have the option to gun down a character with the Stalker bolter stratagem. For character support I've gone for Manius Calgar for full rerolls, Chaplain Cassius for some great value litanies, and a Lieutenant carrying the Seal of Oath. I think the Seal of Oath could really help out the Ultramarines force, because it'll give them full rerolls to hit and wound against 1 target, and even bolters are going to start making massive dents in something when they're all re-rolling wounds, potentially with +1 to wound as well from Cassius. White Scars we've gone for a very aggressive option, all of them carrying auto bolt rifles, which should allow them to charge straight across the battlefield, moving and advancing, and then hopefully charging the enemy. Again, they all have power fists, and we've taken 1 Stalker bolt rifle squad just in case we might need to snipe a certain character. To lead them, we've got a Chapter Master with a power fist to give them all decent rerolls in both shooting and melee, a Librarian for those great White Scars powers, a Lieutenant for reroll 1s to wound, and Khosrow Khan for +1 to wound in combat, and another source of reroll 1s to hit, and he's quite fighty himself. Having 4 HQs does mean that we've got 2 battalions, which is certainly an advantage. I'd be very tempted to give someone Plume of the Planesrunner for +1 to charge as well as potentially tooling up the characters with other fighty relics or warlord traits. Next we have Iron Hands, and Iron Hands Intercessors have been making a bit of a stir at the LVO recently, so we've very much taken some of that nastiness along. Iron Father Phyros will give the Intercessors nearby him a 5+ invul save, and a Chief Apothecary will make all those Iron Hands have a 5+ Feel No Pain type save, making this Intercessor army ridiculously durable, and we can also potentially heal 1 per turn as well. I've gone for a full complement of Stalker bolt rifles with these guys, as they'll be able to move and shoot with no penalty, and also reroll 1s for heavy weapons. Their damage output isn't spectacular still, but they will pretty much happily delete any 1 or 2 units they focus on each turn. To help with the damage output, we also have a Lieutenant, who's taking the Tempered Helm for some command point farming, a Chaplain with the Master of Sanctity upgrade, again for +1s to hit and +1 to wounds from listeners, and an Ancient, so a lot of them will be fighting or shooting when they die. I think this one would have quite a lot of board presence and be quite scary to face, to be honest. Not a fat lot is going to remove those Intercessors efficiently with those very powerful defensive buffs. Next up we have Raven Guard. I've chosen to go with a mix of the various bolt rifles on these guys. We've got some Stalker rifles and regular bolt rifles to sit back at the back, and some auto bolt rifles for units that are either going to be jumping in with the infiltrate stratagem, or perhaps just advancing up the board in the first place. We've got Shrike leading them to give them some rerolls to hit, and also being a pretty nifty countercharge punch character. There's a captain with a Thunderhammer who will be using Master of Ambush to put him and one fighting squad of Intercessors up close and personal to the enemy turn 1, and again a Master of Sanctity Chaplain to give them some +1s to hit and wound in their listeners. I'd certainly be looking for opportunities to use that Stalker Bolt Rifle stratagem to pretty much insta-delete a character when they're in Tactical Doctrine. Next up we have the Salamanders, and again I've chosen to go with a mix of the bolt rifles for these. The Stalker Bolt Rifles do profit quite well from their Master Artisan style rerolls, but the auto and regular bolt rifles will certainly profit from Tactical Doctrine. I've actually swapped out a few Power Fists for Thunderhammers on the Salamanders, which I'd put on the advancing squads, just because those powerful rerolls mean that if you invest a little bit more on the squad sergeants, they could actually do a serious amount of damage between rerolling one Thunderhammer failed hit and failed wound per turn, so they should be pretty nasty to fight in melee. To support them we have Adrax Agatone, who gives some rerolls, powerful melee buffs on the charge to nearby Salamander's infantry, and also absolutely hits like a truck himself in close combat. This guy very nearly won rounds an Imperial Knight in one round of fighting. We also have a Librarian for Fire Shield and the boosted toughness spell to help make the first unit of Intercessors that's nearest the enemy hardest to kill each turn. Either the Librarian or the Lieutenant would also take the Obsidian Aquila for a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, and in combination with the ignoring AP-1 and that, the Salamanders will also be pretty hard to shift. And to round it off, as usual, we'd have the Lieutenant and Master of Sanctity Chaplain, both of whom I'd certainly be giving Power Fists in this list, because of those lovely Master Artisan style rerolls, making them very scary in close combat as well. For Imperial Fists, this is a variant that we do actually see semi-regularly on competitive tables. Imperial Fists absolutely love their Stalker Bolt Rifles, as they ignore cover, have extra hits on 6s, and also get +1 damage against vehicles, meaning that each shot that gets through is a flat 3 damage when they're targeting tanks through 90 shots, particularly when they're re-rolling full hits from a Chapter Master and 1s to wound with a Lieutenant, and maybe even getting +1 to wound with Tank Hunters. They really are going to be able to take out vehicles reasonably easily, at least compared with all these other lists. As well as this, we have Torgaradon to give his Signum Array to make one squad 2 up to hit, but also his massive melee punch as well, which will be great for a counter-attack if the enemy gets too close. To support them, we've also brought in a Chief Apothecary for that 6-up Feel No Pain type aura, to make the core of the army more durable, and again a Master of Sanctity Chaplain for some +1s to hit and wound goodness. And if I was doing this one for Crimson Fists, I'd sub out Torgaradon for Pedro Cantor instead, because full Chapter Master rerolls and an extra attack when they get close to the enemy are both very good buffs to have. Next we're on to the Sons of Sigismund, the Black Templars, and I've chosen to equip most of these with auto bolt rifles, though with some regular ones and one squad of Stalkers to potentially use the stratagem. Again, they all have Power Fists, and with their unique Assault Doctrine we'll be hoping to throw them straight into the enemy lines. We've really loaded up on the special characters here, including the Emperor's Champion, who's just great value for points, Chaplain Grinaldus for some Litany and Psychic Denial support, and Helbrecht himself for his unique melee buff and his Chapter Master style rerolls. Finally, we've got a Lieutenant to give a relic to, which would be quite tempted to take the Crusader Helm to put a squad into Assault Doctrine very early, though they do have other great relics to be fair. Moving on, we come to Blood Angels, unfortunately no longer able to use the Indomitus Crusader formation, as that's just for Codex Space Marines. We've gone absolutely full on the auto bolt rifles here, and I've permitted myself the luxury of upgrading 3 squads of them to Death Company Intercessors. As they are still essentially Intercessors, they just get 1 additional attack on the charge and that 6-up Feel No Pain, which makes them decently more durable. To buff these guys, we've taken Dante for his Chapter Master rerolls for both shooting and combat, though he's no slouch in close combat himself either. A Lieutenant with the Icon of the Angel for additional charge boosts. Asterath the Grim to cast 2 litanies per turn for potential +1 to hit and wound, or maybe full rerolls in close combat again. And finally a Captain with a Power Fist, Storm Bolter and the Quake Bolts to give 1 unit +1 to hit in melee. In hindsight though, I will be quite tempted to pick up the standard as sacrifice to give feel no pain type saves on the regular Intercessor squads, so it might well be worth swapping something out for that, as 5+ feel no pain type saves are very good, even if it is in quite a small cluster of them. Next we come to the Dark Angels with their recent update from Ritual of the Damned. I've chosen to go mainly for the longer range weapons for them, 2 squads of auto bolt rifles for the advancing force, 5 bolt rifle squads, and 2 stalker squads. Their boosted Devastator doctrine will give extra AP to the Stalkers, and 6-inch range to the Rapid Fire and Stalker variants. I've chosen for the main character to buff them to be Azrael for this, as he gives a 4+ invul save to nearby infantry, making them a lot harder to take out, plus those very nice Chapter Master rerolls that Intercessors really love for both shooting and fighting. On top of this, we've got a Lieutenant and an Ancient and Librarian to offer some further support. For Space Wolves, we've mainly focused on close combat orientated things, with auto bolt rifles, 3 sets of bolt rifles, and some power fists. Logan himself will be supporting these guys on foot with his full rerolls and decent fighty profile. Arjak for some nice reroll ones and his own very powerful Thunderhammer attacks, and then I've chosen Nyar Stormcaller, as the Space Wolves do have some very useful psychic powers, and potentially even the option to make some units -1 to hit as well, which could be useful as they're trying to get across the board and put their power fists and Thunderhammers to good work. Who I very sadly had to drop down to 80 Intercessors due to the additional point that they cost. The Death Watch will be absolutely brutal in terms of their damage output though. Those special issue ammunition variants really mean that they're going to absolutely shred whatever they touch. I've gone for a nice mix of the different bolt rifle variants here. The Stalkers mainly so they have some damage output against vehicles, but all of the extra AP and wounding on 2s that they can get from the other special issue variants mean that they're one of the hardest hitting of these Intercessor list variants. We've got a Watchmaster and a couple of Watch Captains with Stormbolters and Power Fists to both give decent rerolls over a wide area of the army and also provide some countercharge threat too. Their mission tactics of rerolling 1s to wound would also be pretty handy against a decent variety of targets. So there you have it then. I feel like out of this list, the Iron Hands and Imperial Fists might be some of the ones that are scariest on the table, mainly because they can put a decent amount of damage on hard targets with those Stalker bolt rifles. In particular, the Iron Hands would be an absolute pain to try and kill, so even if you do manage to table them by the end of the game, they've likely managed to score all of the midfield objectives for a very long time. To be honest though, I do think that putting an excessive amount of Intercessors on the tabletop could cause a lot of opponents some problems, as you're just going to be lightly overwhelming the various firepower that they have to deal with the standard primaris marine profile, so some are going to survive and are going to be able to hold objectives pretty well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, particularly if you've had any success playing with a large amount of Intercessors yourself. It is quite interesting to see exactly what you can achieve when you try and get this many bodies on the table. Also, if there's anything else that you think would improve any one of the factions here, again let me know. I'm sure that there's things that I've missed, as I've had to go over 10 different codexes and had a rough guess at what my first instincts would be towards buffing the army. And between warlord traits, relics, stratagems and unique characters, there are quite a lot of options between this lot, so I'm sure there'll be things I've overlooked. If you'd like to see other 40k tactics related content, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We have new 40k related content out every single day. If you're thinking about buying any 40k and you live in the UK, I do have an Element Games affiliate link in the description below. Basically, if you click on that before ordering, then it doesn't cost you any more at all, and the channel gets a small amount of support for sending you to them. They're basically one of the third-party 40k sellers who stock a lot of Games Workshop's products and usually give you 20% off. I've ordered a few things from them over the years, and I've never had any issues myself. So anyway, thanks again for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.